Rebecca Dunn, Palm Beach, Florida. Let's assume that all the stars lined up correctly and Ron Paul were elected president.
Okay.
Which would be wonderful. And let's say we had a very reluctant legislative branch and a reluctant or uninspired judicial branch. What would you see Ron Paul's lead in this? How do you feel that he, without overstepping his boundaries in the presidential role, how would you like to see him bring about many of the changes that we've talked about today?
Well, there is the veto power. I mean, these people won't use the veto power anymore because they're afraid they're too weak, and there actually is a majority of the other party sometimes, and it's politically difficult now to use the veto power, but you can veto. I think he would have to be a bit like a monk who was prepared to renounce a lot of things to actually be in that job, because it would be tempting to use powers, but if the office itself has become the problem, we would have to have someone who would actually read the Constitution and only use the powers that actually seem to be there in some reasonable way. So we need a sort of a stoic individual, I suppose, to carry out such a program. I don't know what I can say beyond that. I mean, I don't really worry at this late date about the poor old president's boundaries. If you did a diagram and you say, well, here's the branches and there's this big line between them, but then the presidency says, well, all of foreign policy, though, that's mine. And of course, in practice, that affects a great deal of domestic policy. Pretty soon the president is claiming most of the diagram, if we had a chart for this or something. So I'm not worried about the boundaries of the poor old president very much. Yes?
Assuming for the sake of argument that there are powers inherent in the office of the president as contemplated by the framers of the Constitution, which are not explicitly stated in Article 2, how do those who argue for this unitary executive, as you call it, not bound to acknowledge that these powers, and particularly the manner in which they are wielded, are still constrained by the Bill of Rights and other subsequent amendments to the Constitution?
All right, let me think about that. Well, partly it's by making a complete and total exception of foreign affairs. I think that's their best card trick, is to say, well, foreign affairs is of such importance, and the powers came directly from a different source, from the king. They'll sometimes say that. I think it's essentially, well, okay, now I won't say he's unitary executive theory because he's probably worse, but Professor Harvey Mansfield makes the argument that after all, the president is above and beyond the Constitution. He's been saying this every week for a while now because Machiavelli told him this when they confer. And so the president has all the emergency powers that Machiavelli or Carl Schmitt or a number of people imagine must exist in the world for us to be safe. And so this is this big world of hostility, and you have to have those powers and deal with all those things. And after that, we can talk about civil liberties and Bill of Rights. So that would just be in a way of a much more subordinate status. But if I can pin it down any closer, I will. But that's how I think they do it. As far as I can tell, I'm not sure they really put much real argument into some of the things they assert. There's a lot of assertion, and if you read the torture memos, I mean, they're rather painful reading. Literally, you'll find a lot of sheer assertion in them, as well as sort of various tendentious legal argument. Ma'am?
Rosalind McLennan, Rockville, Maryland. You cited the second article of the Constitution, and I wanted to know why this Section 4 hasn't been implemented and used more often to bring down or to stop this serial killing or the serial initiator of war. The president shall be removed from office on impeachment and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, Section 4 of Article 2.
Yeah, and
when one intern, Monica Lewinsky,
know.
almost brought down a president, or at least incited a columnist to write, "Mr. President,
Okay.
you are a disgrace."
Well, a conspiracy theorist, which we needn't be, but sometimes things just work out. A conspiracy theorist would say that the Republicans knowingly launched an absurd impeachment to discredit the idea of impeachment. Now, that might be going too far, but the fact is they helped discredit the idea of impeachment. And when Nixon squeaked by resigning, I think that was unfortunate because we didn't get a test of the principle of impeachment. I tend to agree with Raoul Berger, by the way, who argues that if the president just screws up, he can be impeached. It doesn't have to be a crime in the case law sense, in the criminal law sense of the word. It doesn't have to be a crime. The president really messes everything up, he gets impeached. It's basically a political provision in the Constitution. So yeah, I wish we did. I mean, I'm not particularly partial to the radical Republicans in the 1860s. There are days when I wish Andrew Johnson had been impeached just to establish the precedent, although that would have had some other drawbacks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Althea Schoen from Edison, New Jersey, and in keeping with the conference's theme of civil liberties, I just wanted to make sure that people know about the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which is headquartered in Northampton, Massachusetts. Okay. And they've spearheaded the passage of over 300 anti-Patriot Act resolutions by cities and towns and a few states across the country. And these resolutions instruct the local police not to cooperate with the feds in doing anything unconstitutional. And the Bill of Rights Defense Committee is trying to think of other ways to oppose the newer abuses of the Bush administration on a local level, and they promote local activism on these issues. So if you're interested, you should look up their website, which is bordc.org.
Well, that's a very good point. I would like everybody in the so-called blue states to get out their copies of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. Because if the red states won't do it, I'm for anybody doing it. But yeah, to the extent that we have any say in local governments, these need to be used. And it might seem peculiar if we suddenly have a coalition in which all sorts of leftists and progressives are talking about states' rights, so be it. Okay. Well, thank you.